Hi, my name's Iman. I'm a visual artist. I'm part of the Blackbird collective. Think about what you would see if you were in the Cutty Sark ship, looking out the window and seeing London for the first time ever. So we're going to be making a landscape, thinking about the layers within a landscape, and then using the materials of charcoal and tea stained paper to make the landscape. Because the Cutty Sark traded in tea, so we're going to use that in part of our workshop today. So we'll need 2 A3 pieces of paper and 3 A4 pieces of card. Charcoal, you can use any size really. I have the thin ones and a couple of thick ones, this size, and a glue stick, scissors, 2 pan lids, one bigger than the other, and a cup of strong tea with a broad brush, which I'll explain why in a second. Our first step is to get our card, our A4 card, and usually you want the tea to be pretty strong so that the colour turns out nice and dark like this one. So I would put 3 tea bags, leave it for 4 minutes, and then just with a brush you want to cover both sides of the paper generously, like that. Once you've covered one side, we turn it round and cover the other side. And then we put it aside to dry. We want to make 3 of these. And while we're waiting for them to dry, we take our 2 pieces of A3 paper and the biggest circular pan lid, and we trace it. We want to put it in the center, and this is basically going to act as our window. If you imagine looking outside of a ship, a circular window on a ship, this is what we're going to be looking through. Then we get our smaller lid and we place it in the center of the big circle, like this. Trace it. And then what we want to do is cut out the inner circle so we can see through it. So one good way of doing this is actually to fold a piece of paper in half and get our scissors and trace the line that we just drew. like this, and we can put this aside, we don't need it. And now we have a window. Once that's done, we can add details at the end, but we'll put it aside. And the next part is making the landscape that you'll be looking at through the window. So I'm imagining London in the 1800s. There's probably some buildings, some clouds, and a bit of the water. But I'll start with the furthest thing away, which is the clouds. So we'll get our tea stain paper, which looks like this once it's dry. So if we start drawing clouds with some charcoal, I'm using the thin one because you can get nice clean lines. And using circular shapes like this, you can kind of draw the shape of the clouds. I'm going to do a couple that can go next to each other in our image. Make each one slightly different. And don't worry too much about making it look perfect because we're going to be cutting these out. And with charcoal, the nicest thing about it is that you can always rub it out with your finger like this. So as long as you can see really the outline of the clouds. Let's say we'll have one more here. And a sun. The next stage is to cut these out. Let's start with this one. And because clouds are quite wispy looking, I would kind of like just rub the edges with your finger. Sun. So now we have all our foreground pieces, our background pieces in our landscape, which we can arrange on the piece of paper. Like this. I'm going to rub these. And don't worry too much about getting some charcoal on your paper because we're going to be sticking on layers. And if you want, you can also do some shadows on the clouds, some lines like this, maybe something, just circular lines like that to give it that kind of fluffy feel. And then rub them with your finger like that. And our sun. So if we imagine our window is here, maybe a good tip is to trace the circle onto the second piece of paper, just slightly, so that when you're adding to your image you know what's going to show through the window. So let's say, so that's our sky up there. Maybe we can have a lot of clouds like that, and our sun there. So our next stage is to stick it down with some glue, just a glue stick. And it's quite nice to have some overlap to give it some depth and make it seem a little further away. So let's say this guy goes here, and our sun goes just a little bit behind there. And our last little cloud, make sure you cover as much as you can with the glue because it's made of card. It might peel off over time. Let's say we put this guy here. And the next stage is figuring out what would you imagine seeing that is closer than the clouds. So I'm thinking probably a lot of buildings, maybe not skyscrapers because we're thinking the 1800s, so maybe lots of chimneys. So we take our next piece of tea stain paper and imagine a horizon of buildings. So I'm going to just start with some chimneys. Let's say small to start off with. Houses. Maybe like some that are taller at the back. That. 4 chimneys there maybe. Maybe that's where a little street is, so you don't see much there. Like that maybe, another one there. And some more chimneys. And because we're only going to see that much of the image, you don't need to worry about filling the whole page. So the next thing I do is draw a line. Maybe that doesn't have to be too straight, but just so you know where you're cutting out, what you're cutting out. So let's start like this. I'll cut this line out. And it's up to you when you add the detail, because you can probably add some windows in there if you want them to show. But this is going to be quite far away, so you probably wouldn't see too much. So I would really just colour it in with your charcoal, like that. Rub it with my fingers, that. And get a scissors and cut them out. Like that. Okay, so there might be bits that are still the colour of the paper, so I would just take the charcoal, maybe the thick one, it's quite nice for broad strokes, and just go over the edges like this. Maybe the top's darker than the bottom. And let's say we have our buildings up here. And once we're happy with where it's going, we stick it down. See, that's where they're going. And then maybe we'll have a row of closer buildings, which means they'll be bigger. Maybe some houses. You could do a factory or whatever you'd imagine, really. Actually, a factory wouldn't be there in the 1800s. But let's say a bigger version of what we just did. So the chimneys would be wider, more spaced apart. And let's say we've got a little street there as well. It's a bit wider than the one we started off with. And our chimneys. You can even do a little street like that. And I would cut it out before colouring it in, because then you get a nice edge on the edge. You get a nice dark colour where the charcoal where you put the charcoal. So this bit is easier because you're cutting out bigger shapes. And so for this bit, maybe I'll colour it in with charcoal so it's darker. Say we can put our house there. We don't need this bit, so I'll cut it off. Maybe something like that. If you remember, this won't be seen. We only have this much of the picture, so I could probably get away with putting this guy here. And this guy in front, like that. And so at this point in the landscape, the closest thing that we'd see is the river. You might want to put like a dockland here, some boats, a market, you know. It's really up to your imagination. But what I would do next is work on the water. So if that's the end of our circle, we want a good amount for our water. So what I'll do is, with water, it's quite nice to just use fluid curvy lines, kind of similar to the clouds, and maybe like a variation of small ones and big ones, like that. And then let's say the big one, medium one, and then a little one like that. And we can draw the detail once we've cut them out, so I'll start with this. And the reason why this one is much smaller, these waves are much smaller, is because they're further away. And so the closer you get, the bigger the waves look. So let's see. So if we start with the furthest set of waves, maybe like there. We can glue it down. Like this. And with the thin charcoal, where have you gone? We can draw some details of the waves. So this breaks really easily. Say like that. And they don't all have to be like uniform, just kind of, you want to give the impression of moving water. And then you go like that, like with your fingers. The next set of waves can go on top, like this. Say like that. And like the other waves, I'm going to do wavy lines, maybe a bit thicker, to make it look like it's a bit closer than the other ones. Maybe like that. And then our last bit, we might not even see this, we'll see. Guess we can test it with the window. So I'm going to put it a little bit further up, stick it on a little bit further, closer to the medium waves, like that maybe. And let's do a couple of And so the great thing with charcoal is if you take a spare bit of paper, let's say this colour, and keep going like this till you've got a flat surface, you'll be able to get a nice even stroke, which means going over the cut out bits, you might get a nice edge on it. And using the small bits of charcoal, you can add detail. You can maybe we want a bit of colour in the sun, so it sticks out a little bit. Even though the sun is definitely not dark. And let's see what it looks like with the window on top. I'm happy with that, so I'm gonna go ahead and stick it. So we'll put this aside and turn. We want the big circle on the outside to be facing down, and we're putting the glue on the other side. Make sure you cover it well. let's give that a go. Take our image in the middle, and because they're the same size paper, we can just match the corners together like that on each side, and then don't worry about getting this messy. It is a messy material, charcoal. Now what I would do is put glue on the edges so that it doesn't come off. One's fine. And so everything that is white is inside the boat. So one nice idea would be to draw the frame of the boat, of the window. So I'm imagining like a metal round frame, window frame. So I'm going to trace this circle line with the charcoal. Like that. And then smudge it out towards the outside of the circle, like that. And then what I'd do next is trace the second circle that we did, the bigger one. Nice thick lines. Now we just do the same with that. Smudge it on the outside. And you give this impression that there's a little shadow there. And you can use anything to smudge charcoal. You can use a sponge, a brush, a paintbrush. You can use pretty much anything. But you can also just use your fingers. I'm imagining maybe some bolts on there, little screws. That. And maybe colour them in. But you can design this any way you want to, really. Whatever you imagine would be your experience. And because it's a really old boat, we know that the walls are made of wood from the inside. So what we can do is maybe draw some lines where the wood panels are. That. And some wooden patterns. And you can be quite rough with the charcoal because you can also, I'm going to rub these lines on top anyway, so the detail won't be sharp. It'll just be the impression of wood. And the last bit. And where the panels end, I'm going to make them darker. So that's where the window starts, so it pops. The last bit is just to smudge it. This is a choice though, you don't have to do this. In the direction of the wood lines, that's what I'm doing, so that's our window. I want to darken the outlines. I've changed my mind about the bolts. Okay. Now we just have a window frame. And that's it.